Hello, it's great to be with you again. My name is Dan Brook. I'm a retired cleric and academic from Hudson, Wisconsin. And we're offering today another edition of Conversations with Clergy. Today, however, we're stepping outside our normal bounds just a little bit by looking at an aspect of the clergy that is ancient in its origins, but very contemporary in its application. And the reason we are doing this series, you might remember from watching us before, is that there are 5 major social institutions in our culture, one of which is religion. However, the other 4 tend to get a lot more activity, interest, press, whatever you want to call it, namely politics, economics, family, education, and they're all important. But we also think that the aspect of religion in our culture has a long history of producing many wonderful things for people individually and for cultures as a whole. So we just thought it'd be a good thing to dedicate some of our time to talk about the influence of the church and clergy in our contemporary life. Now, back to my original comments, we're going to be talking today about something that's called spiritual direction. And as I said, its roots are fairly ancient. The way it's applied these days is quite contemporary. And it's my pleasure to introduce a spiritual director living in North Hudson, Wisconsin. Her name is Nancy Koski. Nancy, it's great to meet you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Now, the first question that I had about 2 decades ago is the question that probably most of the people who are watching us have. What is spiritual direction? So if you could just sort of give a layperson's definition of what spiritual direction is.
Well, my short answer is spiritual direction is a confidential professional relationship in which I, as the spiritual director, would listen to another's faith journey with an open and compassionate heart, allowing the Holy Spirit to be the true director. But it really is a time set aside in a busy person's life where they could meet with another individual to talk about their spiritual journey. It may contain issues such as concerns about the church, a moral dilemma, workplace concerns, even a dream that they might have had, something very sacred that they want to bring and share with another individual.
So here's a question I suspect you have not been asked before. Why is it necessary for somebody like you, or why would it be better for somebody like you to accomplish that important role and task rather than a run-of-the-mill clergy person, say like myself?
Well, as you know, clergy persons are very busy with their congregation, their home visits, hospital visits, and it may offer an opportunity for just having an outsider to talk about. Maybe there is a problem with the church that they would like to discuss. They could go to a spiritual director, know that that conversation would be held in confidence, that whatever they said would be held there, and so they could be more free to talk.
And given that that all is true, and from my own experience it surely is, where did this whole thing begin? If you were to trace the roots of spiritual direction sort of to its beginning, where was that?
That is a very good question, and I tried to be prepared for that question. And it's an ancient, as you said, ancient practice, back to the desert abbas and mamas, where people would just sit with another individual. And it's not contained to just Christianity, which is my background, but it's also in the Jewish faith, Muslims. Many of the true religions have spiritual guides or spiritual directors. So I can't really put a date or time on when this ministry really began.
So when would you say it was sort of formalized, in the sense that people took training for it, that there was kind of a body of theory or theology that supported it, so that it became something that was what would I say, more formally approached than the informality that it probably began with?
Well, I am familiar with St. Ignatius of Loyola, who a lot of the training that I had done came out of his personal experience of discernment and working through what was of God and what was maybe not so much of God. And that's a lot where the training kind of came from, that I know of, more formal training, where he had actually trained disciples in this form of discernment, and I can't remember if he was a 16th century or a 17th century monk.
But certainly before either of us was born.
Definitely.
Okay. So he's kind of Reformation era.
Yes.
In terms of the historical part of this. And so is it helpful for you to just, or do you think it would be helpful for you to just identify a little bit about what the Ignatian approach to spiritual direction is, and maybe how it might be differentiated from others?
St. Ignatius was really focused on discernment, and that's discerning of the spirits. He put together what was called the Extended Ignatius Exercises, which I've also completed. And that's looking at the life of Christ, the 4 weeks of life, from his birth, his ministry, his death, and his resurrection. And it's really going through Scripture and paying attention to what comes up within us. As we're reading the Scripture, there might be a particular phrase, a particular word that's really standing out, and then concentrating on that and meditating about it. Why is that word so important to me, and why is it coming up? And finding that might be, is it leading to a place of life, or is it leading to a place where I'm feeling drained? And that's helping me to discern what might be of God and what might be otherwise.
This thought just came to me, and this is just a little excursion from our conversation. When you talk about discernment, is there a difference, do you think, in the ability of males versus females to discern the direction that they're going in, that their thoughts are in, and all that sort of stuff? In other words, do you think females are better spiritual directors than males, or the converse?
Not necessarily. Especially in my training, I have had the opportunity to be in community with very skilled male spiritual directors. I think our approaches are probably a little bit different. Females might be more inner process, where males are external processing of information. So, but I've seen gifted spiritual directors in both sexes.
Now, what led you? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background,
Sure.
The aspects of your training, your life, that all work together to bring you to the point that you were introduced to spiritual direction. I suspect experienced it, and maybe found it so helpful that you went and got the training too, and even touch on how long and extensive this training is.
Sure. Well, like any good Lutheran, I pulled away from the church right after confirmation, and all through my college years, I pretty much stayed away. It wasn't an important part of my life. I was focused on my education to get my bachelor's degree in chemistry and biology, actually. So I ended up being a scientist, and I have worked for 3M Corporation for, 23 years. Since I recently decided to retire and focus on ministry. And But what really brought me back is in the early 90s, I had started to attend Trinity Lutheran Church here in Hudson. And as part of that organization, there was a Friday morning Bible study that I participated in. One of the members, Nell Black, who is also a member of Trinity and is a spiritual director, spoke about this ministry, spiritual direction. So it was brand new to me at that time. What was very important was it was a critical time. I was just getting back into the church, determining that spirituality and religion was important to me. I was really struggling with my career at the time, questioning my direction I had taken in career, and struggling with some relationships. So it was at an opportune moment in my life that I said, hey, I really want to find out what this is all about. So I attended spiritual direction with Nell Black for the very first time, and it really transformed my life. It was the first time that I really felt heard, and there wasn't an expectation. I was accepted and validated for who I was. There was no expectation that I was supposed to be a certain type of person, and it was really freeing and life-giving. So what actually led me to get into spiritual direction training, that was a 14-year-long process.
Wow.
Of really trying to figure out what gave me life, what was draining me of life. But then I started to pay attention. As part of spiritual direction, you start paying attention more to what's going on around you. And I noticed that people were coming to me for just to talk about issues that were going on in their life, whether they were friends or coworkers, mostly. But I found that very life-giving, to sit with another person and listen to their story. But what really helped was the nudging from my spiritual director to look into the training. And at the time, I was working full-time at 3M, so I needed a program that would be available in the evening hours. I started at St. Catherine's University looking at their Masters of Theology and took some introductory courses in spiritual direction. And that helped to kind of feed my spirit, letting me kind of know, yes, I think this is the right direction that I'm to go on. But I wasn't sure I wanted a master's in theology. So I looked into the Sacred Ground Spirituality Center, which is located very close to St. Catherine's University. It just is not affiliated with the university. And this organization offered a 5-year training program. I've just completed 2 of the 5 years, and that 2 years was classroom work. And the next 3 years will be what's called facilitated supervision as part of continuing education.
And what exactly does that mean? Do you have to have somebody with you as you practice the art, the skill of spiritual direction?
Very much like a therapist. This is like a practicum, where I now am able, I've completed the coursework, I sit one-on-one with individuals, there's nobody else with us. But what I'll do is write a verbatim. And that verbatim includes the background of the directee. It includes the particular issue they brought at a particular session, and then the conversation. So what this person said, what I said, and back and forth. But I'll also record what comes up in me, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, how my body responds to something they said. There are no actual names given because we want to maintain confidentiality. But then I present that in a small group. It will be 2 instructors from the Sacred Ground Spirituality Center, as well as colleagues who are still in the training program. And what I'll do is I'll present that verbatim, and they'll help me to process what's coming up for me when I'm sitting with somebody. Because many times what a directee will present are issues that I've experienced myself or am experiencing. And so it's making sure that my stuff is not getting in the way of being a good director and a good listener.
And how many directions are you expected to do in that 3-year time phase to fulfill the responsibility?
There's a minimum hours of 75 hours to 100 spiritual direction hours
Over that 3 years?
over that next 3 years, yes.
So plus, in addition to that, how often do you meet to go over it with your peers and colleagues?
We will meet every other week, starting in September.
Wow, for 9 months, and then a little break, and then whatever.
A little break during the summer. But if I am seeing people during the summer, right now I don't have any directees, but I'm looking for them. But once I start seeing people, I can arrange to have summer supervision, where I would be meeting one-on-one with a course instructor and presenting verbatims.
And when you are done with the 5 years successfully, do you have a graduation like, or what happens? And do you have to get licensure in it, or anything of that sort?
It's not really a license. They do give us a certificate of completing the program at Sacred Ground, and there'll be a little bit of a graduation ceremony at the end of the 5 years.
You know, that, so I'm just thinking in terms of, say, being a clergy, to accomplish certain tasks or roles as clergy, especially in this area being contiguous to St. Paul, Minneapolis. For me to do weddings, I had to register with whatever county I'm in and show credentials that I've done it. In order to receive a placement in a parish, I had to go through a process that Minnesota requires to look into your background and make sure you haven't been involved in any mischievous activities and so on and so forth. Do you have to do any of that to participate in this fairly intimate relationship with another human being?
There is not that requirement for a spiritual director for background checks. There's no real overseeing organization for spiritual directors at this time. There may be in the future, but at this time that's not required.
So there's no association of committed spiritual directors incorporated or anything like that?
Not yet.
It's probably a blessing, you think? Well, that's good. That's good to know. So, where was I going with this?
I could add, though, that we do have ethical guidelines, which were set up by an organization called Spiritual Directors International.
Oh.
So they do have guidelines for ethical conduct.
Such as?
Such as, ensuring the confidentiality and privacy of the directee, ensuring that physical and psychological boundaries are very clear, and then also, knowing that there is a power differential between a director and a directee, that you don't exploit that as a director. So those are some of the examples of ethical conduct that we would follow.
Now, I'm embarrassed that my mind runs in troublesome directions sometimes, but in the intimacy of this, let's say somebody confesses something to you that's against the law. Do you know if a spiritual director has the same protections of a clergy, where they have the force of law that allows them not to share that information, even though the same law requires that they are to do everything possible to get the person to voluntarily admit that? Do you have any discussions in your training about that kind of stuff at all?
We did discuss that. I mean, there are certain situations where that confidentiality might be breached, and that would be cases of maybe somebody reported that they sexually molested a child, or that they're planning suicide, and they have a detailed plan. There we would definitely get them to someone highly more qualified than a spiritual director, because that is beyond my training in both cases. We would let that directee know that this is something we need to report, or something that we need to share.
Now, once you've completed the 5 years, and they say, Miss Koski, you are an extraordinarily competent spiritual director, which they will.
I live in hope.
Then what kind of continuing training do you have to take after that?
Well, once I complete the 5 years, there'll always be supervision, which would usually meet once a month with other spiritual directors. And not that I would have to necessarily write verbatim, but I would meet with this group to discuss what was coming up for me when I sat with a particular directee.
But these are equal status people, so you could do the same to them at that point.
Yes.
Okay, and probably would.
But they would probably they'll vary in years of experience, but we're always on the way, so.
Now, in terms of the actual process, why don't you pretend I'm a directee, and let's just demonstrate what typically would go on in a session. Would you feel comfortable doing that? Just
Wow, sure. I'd be honored.
well, why don't?
Can I count this towards one of my hours?
It's okay with me, but remember, it's all over the universe on television, so it's
All right. Just opening up. It might be, would you like a moment of silence just to be centered and just to take a deep breath, feel the presence of the divine with us today. And the agenda is really whatever is on your heart that you would like to discuss.
So now you expect me to say.
I do.
So I opened the door and now I'm stuck. Right? The bottom line is you set the stage basically, and you give people as much time as they want to kind of relax, maybe even build courage, because my guess is that when somebody comes to you, that often it's about a matter that has a lot of emotional weight and baggage and other stuff maybe connected to it. Very personal, very intimate, hard to share, hard to open up about. And this opening sort of centering time gives the mind time to kind of come to grips with things and say, okay, here it is, let me start spilling this out.
And it may take several sessions before a person would actually feel like very comfortable with me, trusts me, to share something so heavy and intimate. And I would expect that it would take more than just one session.
So it's all basically, I should say not all, but it's definitely relationship-based, both on a personal level, your level with a person who's being directed, and of course, further expanding on a relationship with God, however the person sees God to be. So really, you are a sort of a hall monitor, making sure somebody gets from the classroom to the toilet or whatever and stays on a straight path so they're finally successful in the end.
I never thought of it that way.
It just came to me. You can see how juvenile I can be sometimes. Now, why do you think it's difficult, as I think it would be for me? Why is it difficult to bring another person into a conversation about things spiritual in our culture? My guess is that 99.99% of the people within the context of our culture might never avail themselves of the opportunity to sort of have a companion as together they sort through sort of the compelling personal issues. Why do people find that difficult, do you think?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure I have an answer.
Did you find it difficult?
Well, for many years, I walked away from the church, and so I had little use for it. But when I was welcomed back here in Hudson, then I found a deep hunger. There was a desire to learn more about this divine spirit, this God, and it became easier, for me anyway, to discuss this with with another individual who I knew was a faithful individual. But it does take time. And it's not a ministry that is right for everyone. So.
Now, how does somebody, say within our viewing audience, how, if they would want to avail themselves of the gift of a spiritual director leading them through some important decision-making in their life, how in the world would they find one? I mean, in Hudson here, for example, how would anybody know who you are or who Nell is, or any other? Are there other spiritual directors besides the two of you in Greater Hudson, as far as you know?
Well, I do have one colleague in my class who is in the Ellsworth area.
Oh.
And then there's Nell, myself. We're both from Trinity, so you could call Trinity Lutheran to get a hold of us. I believe the Carmelite sisters on 3rd Avenue would also do spiritual direction here in Hudson. In the Twin Cities, of course, there's much more opportunity. There's Sacred Ground Spirituality Center, which has many spiritual directors, but Loyola also has spiritual directors. And there are many online. If you were to Google spiritual director, Hudson, Wisconsin, you might find some hits. Of course, you wouldn't for me because I'm not that technically savvy yet.
but they're available. And in the old days, through Yellow Pages, and for those who still look at Yellow Pages, there might actually be a heading of spiritual direction.
I have not looked.
I'll
have to do that when I get back.
Same here. And secondly, through Google or any of the search engines, I'm going to try that. I should have tried that as we prepared for this. But we might actually be surprised that there's a good number of them. Now, how can you find a good one? Or a good one maybe just depends on trying and seeing if there's a connection there, right?
It really is a trial and error type of approach. It's finding maybe someone who's closest to you, trying that, and you'll know. There'll just be a sense whether you feel comfortable with that person or not. And then, this is a process, a spiritual process. And if it doesn't work with that director, you'll find another one. Or you can ask that director for a referral. So.
Now, you alluded to something earlier that interested me, because this is an issue that I've had myself, both as a clergy and as just a normal human being dealing with people, that you try to be helpful to some people, but you just may not like them. So how do you overcome that as a spiritual director? How do you handle those things when, say, you look at me and you think I have some attitudes that just bug you? So what do you do then?
Well, as a director, I would certainly try to put all my prejudice aside and be fully open and present to you, because it's not about me, it's about you. In this relationship. And then I would take all that prejudice or judgment that might be coming in within me to supervision. And I would talk about that. Now, if it continually gets in the way, I would need to be forthright with the directee, saying, I don't believe this spiritual direction relationship is healthy for either you or I. I'd like you to refer you to another director who might be a better fit for you.
Has that happened so far in your experience?
I have switched directors several times.
Is that right?
I have.
And they're just like, say, a physician. Some you relate better to than others, and even though the process may be the same, the skill level at approaching the problem may vary by gift, really. Some people are gifted more in some areas than others. What do you think your particular, maybe special gift in spiritual direction is?
Well, I would like to say that gift is listening with that open and compassionate heart.
It's hard to be a listener, isn't it, sometimes? Or not? Isn't it hard for you? You are gifted maybe in that.
I have found that spiritual or sacred listening is hard work. To be fully present to another and not to let your mind wander, your own distractions come up is very difficult. And I've learned that in the 2 years of training.
So are there some techniques you can learn to stay absolutely focused on what somebody says? Because certainly I am guilty often of letting my mind go here while I appear to be here. So how do you develop a skill base so you can actually be focused?
It is awareness, really. It's just paying attention and noticing that your mind is wandering, and then calling it back,
Wow.
and being present for the other person. For instance, another tip that was given to me, that if I'm sitting with somebody and they're talking about something that happened that's very similar to what happened to me, the last thing I want to do is say, oh, you know what, that happened to me too, because then it becomes about me, and that's not what spiritual direction is about. So what I really want to do is say, okay, name 5 quick things why the person sitting across from you is different from me, to get you back focused on the other person.
So while it's relational, it's unidirectional, really. It's not a conversation that includes you in any way. It's a conversation that relates only to the person you're directing.
Right. And the name itself, director, is a little bit of a misnomer, because we don't direct. We don't tell people what to do or where to go and what to say. There are no shoulds. It's really, we're trying to facilitate that relationship between the divine and the directee, and really help that directee to take notice of where the divine might have been.
So what word would you use instead of director? Have you thought of that? Spiritual?
I mean, they've been called spiritual guides,
Oh, yeah.
Spiritual facilitator, maybe.
Well, you know, I hate to say this, but our time is moving along. So as we sort of wind this thing down, what are the things you would most like the people who are watching to know that we haven't discussed in this short episode?
I think we have discussed most of the issues. I just welcome the opportunity to be able to sit with another individual on their faith journey if they have any concerns that they would like to share.
Well, I really appreciate that. You know, one thing did come to mind when you were talking about staying focused. And again, it's a mischievous thought, which I find my mind going to too often, is that, you know, when I write a sermon, when I studied homiletics, preaching, all that sort of stuff, we learned that the average attention span of a person sitting in front of you is about 3.5 minutes. And so that every 3 or 3.5 minutes, you have to have what the newspaper people call a hook, something to bring you back, because the mind tends to wander off. Do you find that your directees wander off? You've learned how not to, but if they do, what do you do to bring them back?
There may be an opportunity in the conversation to bring them back to the issue they initially came with.
Can you feel them wondering sometimes?
Oh, they'll wonder.
They do.
So a lot of us want to try to protect our egos, our pride a little bit, so we will tend to deflect and talk about something completely different than what we really is at the heart of the matter. Well,
Nancy, it has, I think, been a joy, certainly for me, and I'm sure for our listeners too, to learn about what is a fairly new aspect of religious life for many in our culture anyway. I mean, in terms of sort of a formal approach to this, meaning that there are people available to help us go through a specific or maybe a general journey in our spiritual life. And I really am impressed that you gave up 23 years of a corporate research position and have dedicated your life to this aspect of ministry, which I suspect will lead you to many others.
Yes.
And many surprises over the years. And so we wish you well. We thank you very much for sharing of yourself and this process with us. And I hope we can talk about it again sometime.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you.